We got a Week 18 matchup between the Panthers and Falcons. Who will finish the season stronger?
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome, everyone, to a Week 18 crossover Thursday presented by PrizePicks. Download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll win $50 instantly when you play $5. So if you do not know me, I am the humble host of Locked On Falcons, Aaron Freeman, joined by an illustrious host of Locked On Panthers, Julian Council, to preview this Week 18 matchup between the Falcons and Panthers, see which team can finish this season strong, give themselves, a little bit of momentum, that all elusive momentum in sports that definitely does not or does exist depending on what your perspective is heading into 2025. And of course, we thank each and every one of you that rides that momentum with us, that are as everydayers, that makes these podcasts, Locked On Falcons and Locked On Panthers, your first listen each and every day. And if you want to join the club as an everydayer, all you have to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So, Julian, talking about this Panthers team as they hope to finish this season strong. Obviously, there are some questions about Bryce Young. Is he the future quarterback in Carolina, despite, he's played pretty well down these last couple of weeks, but there are maybe some looming questions still over whether or not Bryce is the long-term answer in Carolina.
Yeah, absolutely. And last time these two teams played, Andy Dalton was starting quarterback for Carolina, and there was a lot of questions of whether Bryce Young was going to be back at all this season starting, and if he would come back in 2025 as a starter. I thought it was going to be over for Bryce. I thought he would be traded finally after the season was over, and that Carolina was going to be resetting and trying to figure out what they were going to do at quarterback. And certainly was shocking to me that Dave Canales moved on for Bryce so quickly as far as benching him. I shouldn't say moved on, but benched him after 2 weeks after you felt like all offseason long. The reason he was brought here was to work with Bryce and get him to the point where, well, he's actually gotten him to since Bryce has been reinserted to the lineup after Andy Dalton got in that car accident before the Denver game. And Dave had been pretty steadfast that Andy gave him the best opportunity to win games. The shine was kind of wearing off of Andy Dalton, if there was ever really any shine on Andy Dalton anyways, after that Falcons game, because they were driving down the field down 8 points, and he threw a pick, an interception while targeting Ian Thomas that pretty much ended the game as Panthers could not get off the field defensively against Falcons that Sunday afternoon in Charlotte. And since coming back, Bryce has played pretty well. They beat New Orleans at home. Wasn't shiny stat line, but he played well. Beat New York and Munich also. Not a great stat line, but he played well, and I thought he played his best game in the NFL so far against Kansas City in a game where they barely lost. He played well the following week against Tampa Bay, played well in Philly in 3 games where they were playing against playoff caliber opponents, and they came up just so short, but it wasn't the quarterback. So clearly, Bryce is not the main issue here in Carolina. The defense has been an abomination this season. There's plenty of questions about that. I'm sure we're going to get into that momentarily, but I think Bryce Young has positioned himself to be the starter again here in 2025 next season, but I still can't get it out of my mind that every single opportunity that Dave Canales had to say that Bryce Young was getting another opportunity, this is about a development. He never said it until Bryce is finally back in there, and we still don't know what the plan actually was going to be with Bryce Young, when he was going to come back and play. So I can't forget that when considering what their options may be this season, where it's not like there's a great amount of options in the quarterback market anyways. So yeah, Bryce should be back, but this is one more time from the show why he should be back in 2025.
Well, Julian, I joked with you before we recorded that, I could interest you in a veteran minimum Kirk Cousins as a quarterback option, but, I don't think you're going to take that one. But it's interesting because, I remember when Bryce first got benched, I was like, we're going to see Bryce Young again, because there's no way that Carolina's going to play 14 games of Andy Dalton and be right. That's what we want to see. So there was going to be a point where he would get back on the field. And the question to me was whether or not he would play well enough to get back in the good graces of that organization. And I think he has, but as you mentioned, Dave Canales has not necessarily sort of been like, this is definitely my guy. And so we'll see what moves the Carolina Panthers make at that position in the offseason. Another potential person that may not necessarily have the long-term job security is their defensive coordinator, a good friend of Raheem Moore's, and Ejiro Evero. What's going on with this Carolina defense that is one of the worst in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, what's not going on with this Panthers defense that has been demonstrably worse this season they were last year? And a lot of people like to point out that they were fourth in total defense a year ago. They're now last this season, but you look at EPA, DVOA, they were 25th and 26th respectively last season. This was not a good defense. They're 29th in scoring defense. And this season, they're far worse. They're 31st in both EPA and DVOA. They have allowed 496 points, which is the worst in franchise history. And they hit that mark, surpassing the 2019 Carolina Panthers. They gave up 470. And that was a Panthers team that had Luke Kuechly on it defensively, which is still shocking that they gave up that many points during a 16-game season. The Panthers, this year's version, they already gave up the 475 points in that first half with 6 quarters left to go. So you can't even say, well, they played 17 games. Okay, well, if they give up 38 again against Atlanta on Sunday, that will be 534, which will surpass the Baltimore Colts, who gave up 533 points in a 16-game season. Then you can say that, okay, they had an extra game, but still, this has been a terrible defense. And last year's defense was the 4th worst when it comes to points allowed for Carolina. So when you look at it, Ejiro Evero, results-wise, has coordinated 2 of the 4 worst defenses by scoring defense in the history of this organization. And while he'll be coveted elsewhere, and he would have potentially been the Packers DC or the Rams DC, maybe the Giants, had David Tepper not held him hostage a year ago and forced him to stay here. And that's the funny thing. Tepper said 2 years in a row, you're not good enough to be my head coach, but yes, you can coordinate the defense. And no, you can't try to go elsewhere and coordinate a defense, which I find to be very strange and funny in a way. That could be a result now where he gets fired when the defensive talent's not great. They get rid of Brian Burns and bring in Jadeveon Clowney. I told fans he's not going to do anything. And what do you know? He's not done anything. And they get rid of Frankie Louvu, which in large part, Louvu wasn't necessarily the right scheme fit for what Ejiro wanted. And they brought in Josie Jewell, who's been fine, but certainly not as good as Louvu. Jeremy Chin's had a great season in Washington as well. Like, there's plenty of reasons to keep him, but also the results are the results. And it's hard in a results-oriented business to really argue for Ejiro Evero to come back, even if he is going to be likely a highly coveted DC out in the market later on this month.
Yeah, I know Falcon fans, given some of the issues that their defense has gone through with Jimmy Lake, sort of, maybe that's music to their ears, because there's been a lot of talk in Atlanta this season about, replacing the defensive coordinator Raheem Morris, and given that background with Ejiro Evero, maybe that, but given what you're talking about, some of the results that he's gotten in Carolina, I don't know if that's quite the upgrade that you would probably assume just based off of the sort of name recognition and the overall generally good resume that Ejiro Evero has from previous stops in the NFL. So we will talk more about, this Carolina defense and how the Falcons can potentially attack it with their young quarterback and Michael Penix. So this game is really a big evaluation game for this football team, as well as whether or not they can finish this season strong. And we'll get into all of that, guys, as we continue today's Crossover Thursday. And everyone wants to start the new year strong. And the one way that you can have more fun in 2025 than you did in 2024 is going to more live events, sports, comedy, music, theater, whatever event is near you. Gametime is making it easier to get tickets thanks to their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature is going to filter out the fluff and only show you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Gametime is offering great seats at unbeatable prices, and the app's all-in pricing is going to show you the total cost up front, so you don't have to worry about hidden fees at checkout. And we love the panoramic seat views, so you know exactly what you're getting before you buy. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. So talking about the Atlanta Falcons as they hope to get this W and finish the season with a 9-8 record, their first winning season since 2017. And, the big story for this Falcon team is, what do you have in Michael Penix, right? The Panthers are still kind of figuring out, now 2 years into Bryce Young's career, what do they have in their quarterback? Obviously, the Falcons haven't quite figured that out, 2 games into Michael Penix's career. And this third game will help them in that process. We've seen good from Michael Penix. We've seen some up and down play, especially last week until the end of the game. But he showed in the clutch that he could make the throws to help you put yourself in a position to win a game. Unfortunately, the head coach decided that he wanted to minimize the chances of winning the game by mismanaging the clock. But we've talked quite a bit about that on Locked On Falcons. I don't want to talk about that anymore, Julian, if you can oblige me on that. But I think
it's so frustrating. I was yelling at the TV, and like, I obviously I'm not a Falcons fan. It just frustrates me to no end that coaches value preserving timeouts more than the clock. I just will never understand.
Yeah. So with Michael Penix, it'll be interesting to see how the Falcons approach this game. We saw the last time they played the Carolina Panthers, they just were like, we're just going to rely on the run game. And I think that's a good strategy, given some of the things we talked about with this Panthers defense, where, they've given up, 5 straight 200-yard rushing games over the last couple of weeks. And, the Falcons had 200 yards rushing against the Panthers the previous time they played them. And then, they had some kneel downs at the end to take that away, and they finished with 198 or whatever. But that was their best rushing day of the season so far. So I think kind of the evaluation for Michael Penix this week is just like run the football and manage the game. And that's a winning formula against this Carolina Panther team.
Yeah, and I guess, you look at it, Atlanta can still get into the playoffs. I don't think you're probably very confident in New Orleans' ability.
No, if the Saints have the Falcons' fate, there's just no chance. There's no chance.
Right, exactly. And I forget, that rivalry piece of it too is like tanking. There's gonna be a lot of teams that questions this Sunday, like New England. Do you play Drake May? Do you go ahead and you solidify that number 1 pick? I think they're probably going to be fine regardless of whether Buffalo plays Josh Allen very long or not, because apparently Josh is going to play. New Orleans, they have no incentive to try to help Atlanta get into the playoffs. But it is unfortunate because that was such a great game on Sunday. And I left because I loved Michael Penix Jr. at Indiana. Back during the pandemic, they had that game against Penn State where he's reaching to the pylon and getting that touchdown back when he was more of a runner. And then when he goes to play with Clay on the board the last couple of years at Washington, dude was outstanding. So it was cool just for me, who's been a fan of him, to see what he was able to do on Sunday night in that spotlight game against Washington, a must win on the road. Like you don't really put it on him. Yes, you put it on the coach and not calling timeouts. It's like, Raheem, come on, man. But I'm curious to see what he looks like again on Sunday, because third opportunity, this is not going to be a great defense. So if they do throw it, which it would really be malpractice to ever put the ball in the air against this Panthers defense that cannot get off the field when it comes to stopping the run, especially J.C. Horn does not play. Like, he helps him in the run game as well. But if he's not out there in the cornerback room, that's not going to help. But if he is able to throw a little bit, you would expect that he should have success. And he has not necessarily had kind of the accuracy that we've seen so far early on against Giants and even that game against Washington, but he did show those signs on Sunday, and I'm excited to see it. Like, this is still a division where I guess Baker's kind of shown he's going to be the guy in Tampa long-term. Saints, who knows what they're going to do. Atlanta's trying to figure it out. Carolina's trying to figure it out. It's still pretty open as far as who's going to be that quarterback for possibly the next decade in the NFC South that kind of dominates. Can we get back to that era where we had like Cam, we had Drew Brees, had Brady even just momentarily, and everyone felt, even going back to when you had Matt Ryan, everybody felt pretty good about who they had at quarterback.
Yeah. And so, I've liked what I've seen from Bryce Young. He's looking more like the Bryce Young I think people thought was worth the number 1 pick. And we've seen similar flashes from Michael Penix. And so, like, that's going to be sort of part of this game. And I think when you look at slowing down a player like Bryce Young for the Falcons defense, like, to me, the big issue for them is just kind of finishing the season on a positive note, right? Can you continue to get pressure? Can you stop the run? No Chuba Hubbard. He was a real thorn in your side earlier this season, been a thorn in the side of most defenses this year. Adam Thielen's sort of come on strong these last. Don't let Adam Thielen destroy you. That's kind of the motto going into this game. And so you look at, this Carolina team these last 5 weeks, right? I think the stat I saw was Bryce Young's been the most pressured quarterback in the NFL these last 5 games. Well, guess who's had the most sacks in the last 5 weeks? Surprisingly, the Atlanta Falcons, with their horrifically bad pass rush, has suddenly decided at the end of the season to sort of finish this thing strong. So, they now have a chance. They're no longer in last place in terms of sacks this year because of the performance over the last couple of games. And so, if you can get 4 or 5 sacks in this game, like, there's a possibility that they might finish outside the bottom 10 in sack production. And is that just stat padding in garbage time? Absolutely it is. But look, you got to take your wins when you get them, especially when you're a Falcon fan and you just really have not seen a competent pass rush in basically 2 decades in Atlanta. So we will take what we can get when it comes to these things. And if that means, getting some garbage time sacks against Bryce Young in week 18, we will absolutely take that.
Yeah, and the way that Carolina's been playing recently, they've been getting behind. And you look at the Dallas game a couple weeks ago, they gave up 6 sacks, and that's because they had to play from behind. Bryce Young had 4 turnovers that day, did not help with the team, put them in some obvious passing downs, gave up 5 sacks this past Sunday against Tampa, got back down in that game where the defense did not get a stop at all day. Now, there's one late in the second quarter, right before halftime. There's like 50 seconds left. So I'm not going to count that one as a real stop, even though Carolina did get in position to kick a field goal. Pinheiro missed from 53 yards. The defensive, they've not gone off the field, and that has forced the Panthers offense to be perfect. And, well, this Panthers offense, as well as Bryce has played, as well as Adam Thielen has played, as well as you mentioned, they're never going to be perfect, especially when they don't have Chuba Hubbard out there again coming up this Sunday. And Carolina has given up 14 sacks the last 3 weeks. And you brought up the pressure stats as well. They've only given up 36 this season. So to give up a 30 or sacks over the last 3 games, that is a concerning number, and something I talked about on Wednesday, my mailbag episode of what the listeners have here in Locked On Panthers. Like, that's the one thing I want to see improved, is if they can be better at protecting their quarterback against a pass rush, as you mentioned, Aaron. That's not really been all that great this season. Like, I've looked at it for the most part. Like, Atlanta's been like in the bottom when it comes to sacks total and also like pressure percentage. And it's just wild that all of a sudden here they are. But that was kind of like Carolina too. Post-bye, they've been a lot better getting after the passer. Pre-bye, they were right there with the Falcons in the cellar of the NFL when it came to actually getting home and getting quarterbacks on the ground.
Yeah. So we'll see whether or not the Falcons can get after this Panthers quarterback. And, is that a key to victory for either one of these teams, sort of whose defense shows up the best, whose run game, whose offense shows up the best. So we'll get into sort of what each of these teams need to do in order to win this game as we wrap up today's Crossover Thursday. So the NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And you can use that first $5 bet on so many different ways to win, whether it's, who's going to outscore who's going to score that first touchdown, how many points, over unders, all that stuff. And it's not just for the NFL, it's for college football playoffs, it's for the NBA, NHL, all of that and more. And so why not check out this Falcons-Panthers matchup where the Falcons are weirdly favored by 7.5 points. And I'm like, look, I think the Falcons will win, but I don't know if they're going to win by more than a score. So that is something where it's like, take the Panthers on this one. But, whatever you feel like doing, all you got to do is head over to FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance to win $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So, Crossover Thursday here, presented by PrizePicks. Download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons, Julian Council of Locked On Panthers here to talk about this Week 18 matchup and sort of what each team needs to do in order to come away with the win, also known as keys to victory. And Julian, what are 3 things that you think the Panthers need to do in order to finish this season strong with a win?
Yeah, as I've said every week on these things, Carolina needs to do more than 3 things in order to win these games based off of how things have gone in the past. But I think they've played a lot better post-bye. They got the win against the Orleans at home, got the win against the Giants in Munich, of course, and then came back after the bye and played some teams tough. But the last couple of weeks, they've been up and down. They get blown out by Cooper Rush and the Dallas Cowboys, and then they come back to beat an Arizona team. And then last week, well, what happened in Tampa is what happened. So my hope is that this team can show some resolve and really continue to build off the momentum that they had built kind of in the last month and a half and had that into 2025, getting their 5th win. But in order to do that, they're not going to stop the run. They're probably going to give up their 6th straight 200-yard rushing game in a row, and that's going to be another notch to why Jero Rivera should not be back in Carolina next year. Now you look at who's playing. You don't have Shaq Thompson. You may not have Josie Jewell. You don't have Trevon Wallace, your rookie linebacker who filled in for Shaq. You don't have Derek Brown. Maybe you won't be able to stop the run because of that, and it's not necessarily the coordinator's fault. As Dave Canales continuously said, the scheme's not the problem. It's the players. Now, he didn't say the players part, but we all know the players part. But they got to try and make Atlanta at least work for it. If they can allow only like 4.8, 4.9 rushes per attempt, then that can help them in this game. I look offensively, like Thielen's been really good lately, but someone else outside of Adam Thielen's got to do something. Jalen Coker has been the receiver most likely to make some plays, was not super involved last week. Xavier Legette was targeted 9 times, only came up with 5 receptions and couldn't make some of those big plays. And you would like to see him make some plays on Sunday to feel good about him heading into the offseason, that for the first round pick from the year ago or from this season. And then also JT Sanders as well, who's not been that involved in the offense. So seeing some of these younger guys outside of Thielen making some plays and being involved, like that's, I think, a big key for Carolina, as I would imagine Atlanta's going to key on Adam Thielen as that main threat. And then, you got to take care of the football. Win the turnover battle in this game. I do think that would be key because you got a rookie over there, and Michael Penix Jr. has turned it over in both his starts so far this season. So it's likely he can give you one on Sunday. So if you get that turnover, you got to hold on to football as well and capitalize, play complementary football, something that is really eluded Carolina over the 6-year period where they are not going to make the playoffs yet again.
Yeah, you talk about someone else stepping up instead of Adam Thielen. I'm like, I don't know if you need somebody else based off of how D. Alford, the Falcons nickel cornerback, has played very up and down these last couple of weeks. So, if he has another down game, then you just might, get 150 yards from Adam Thielen going up against D. Alford. So we'll see on that front. But I think you're right. The turnover battle is so key. It's a cliche for a reason, right? You just look it up and, you look in Carolina's wins this year, they're +4 in turnover margin, and their losses, they're -10. And Atlanta's wins, they're +9 in turnover margin, and their losses, they're -14. And so it's pretty simple. When you give the opposing team opportunities to score more points by turning the football over, they're going to tend to score more points, and that's going to lead to you losing the football game. So that is also a key to victory for this Falcon team. I think the other one is just run the damn ball, as they say. You don't need to be cute about this, right? Last week, a big part of why the team was so successful in the first half, going up 17-7 against Washington, was because they ran the ball down Washington's throat. And then in the second half, they tried to get a little cute. They started to try to get Michael Penix into a rhythm, and they kind of abandoned the run game. And then next thing you know, their offense sort of stagnated, and Washington sort of have taken the lead, and then they were forced to have to throw the football at that point in time. And so, just stick with the run. That's as you said, everybody's been able to run against the Carolina Panther team. You don't necessarily have to get cute against that. And then the third key for me is just finish the season strong, right? Whatever that takes, the shape of it. Get the bad taste out of last week's loss out of your mouth. Don't show any quit or anything like that. Don't let Washington beat you twice. You have a chance to finish 5-1 in the division for the first time in 8 years. You have a chance for a winning record for the first time in 7 seasons. So it's one of those things where you still have something to play for, even if the fans are sort of all out and checked out of the season because of the playoffs. But for this football team, get something positive going at the end of the season so that at least you can carry that over into the offseason and say, okay, we did some good things at the end of the season that we can build off of going into 2025.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up the fan standpoint. Is it going to be a ghost town in there on Sunday? Is there anybody showing up?
Probably not. Yeah, it is what it is. It is.
That's tough. You always hate that. You want these games to matter. And my hope was that Carolina was going to beat Tampa last week, make Tampa feel like they're not going to make the playoffs, Atlanta lose, and then this game be a game that actually mattered. It still matters, obviously, but we already recognized and acknowledged on this show earlier, New Orleans ain't going to go out here and do Atlanta a favor and beat Tampa, and they're also not capable of beating Tampa Bay as currently constructed this week. Crazier things have happened, but I don't see it happening. It sucks for the Falcons, obviously. I mean, no one in Carolina is weeping over the Atlanta Falcons corpse as they're not going to make the playoffs yet again this season. But I am very curious to see off-season wise, what they do. If Jero Vero does leave Carolina, which I do think will happen, I just don't think you can coordinate 2 lower scoring defenses and then return, especially if they give up 38 points to the Falcons on Sunday and they set the record. I just don't think that's going to be, I don't know necessarily where it's tenable. Davis stood by him, but I don't know if he'd come back. Maybe he goes down to Atlanta. I do think he's a good DC. And you look at his year in Denver, it was a top 10 defense by a lot of metrics, and look at Denver's defensive talent compared to what Carolina's had since he's been here. And also just the injury luck that Denver's had compared to what Carolina's had the last couple of years. And he may be a nice fit for Atlanta, especially with that Raheem Morris relationship dating back to their time in Atlanta under Sean McVay, or LA rather under Sean McVay. So I'm very curious to see how the Falcons offseason goes. They made me look foolish. I picked this team to win the division. That's the last time I ever do that. So thank you, Atlanta. I'm wrong about plenty of things. So it's not like I'm ever going to stop. But I want to see what happens. And it could be moving forward, Bryce and Michael Penix, two guys who could be vying to be the class of the NFC moving forward, NFC South at least moving forward as far as that quarterback battle. So that's one thing I'm really looking forward to in the future, provided that, Raheem Morris gets things figured out in Atlanta long term. And of course, Dave Canales turns things around here in Carolina.
Yeah, you're not the only one that picked the Falcons to win the division. Before the season. So, you knew it was going to be Tampa Bay or Atlanta. It was going to come down to the wire.
Right.
The expectation was the week 18 game was going to be a win in your in type of situation, and we just fell 1 week shy of that. So it's not surprising how this thing went. It's just unfortunate, if you're a Falcon fan, and very fortunate if you're a fan of any of these other three NFC South teams, that it went the way that it did. Because I know the rest of this division does enjoy the Falcons continually struggling to roll that ball up a hill and constantly getting crushed underfoot by it when it rolls back down.
But Saints fans can't say anything there. Like, they don't have any hope. Like, what hope do they have right now? Because at least Carolina, like, since Bryce has come back and played well, and like the way they played against Tampa the first time, the way they played against KC and against Philly, like, there's actually some level of hope. Michael Penix so far has shown you enough, and like, this is a better Falcons team. Clearly, the cap situation is not what it was when Terry Fontenot first got there. I think Raheem Morris second time around will be certainly better than the first time around. Obviously, in Tampa, like, okay, they're good, like, they're a good team. But New Orleans, what are they going to do? So they can't be laughing at anybody, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, my worry with New Orleans is that they actually get smart and they decide, like, hey, we need to kind of do a mini teardown. They can't do a full teardown just because they've hamstrung themselves cap wise, but like, they need to be positioning themselves for that 2026 quarterback class and potentially getting a certain Arch Manning who has local ties to that organization as a grandson of a Saints legend. But I'm hoping that's, if I'm a Saints fan, that's the thing that gives me hope for the future. But because the Saints refuse to do stuff like that, that's also why you're talking about, like, there's no hope for them.
I have an Arch Manning take that's, I guess, kind of related to what we're talking about. It is. I don't think the Mannings are going to let him leave. Because think about it. They won't let him take NIL money until he's a starter at Texas. They never let him do any like social media stuff. When he announced he's going to Texas, he just tweeted it out. They're different. And it's not like Arch needs the money. They don't need the money. And we're seeing quarterbacks that started a lot, Bo Nix, Jaden Daniels, having a lot more success than guys who didn't start that many years. I mean, Caleb, 2 years. I mean, Drake, 2 years. Like, I think that's a lot more than just a 1 year like we've seen in the past. Some guys, like, that's something that matters. And Drew Brees has talked about that. Drew Brees of the New Orleans Saints, you want to get to that certain amount of starts. Well, Arch Manning only starting what would end up being, I guess, depending on how Texas is next year, maybe 16 games in his career before coming to the NFL. Do you think that's enough? Do you think the Mannings would want to do that? I'm just putting that out there. They're different than everybody else that's out here chasing, trying to get to the NFL. And we just saw Drew Aller, who probably could be QB3 and decide to go back to Penn State. Now, he could change his mind. I think it's too late, actually, because they had to go ahead and put his name in. But we'll see. I that's one thing I'm thinking that maybe New Orleans is going to have to wait until 2027 or maybe even 28 before they can even get after Arch Manning.
Okay. Well, that sounds good to me. The longer,
it's good for everybody.
keep good quarterbacks away from the New Orleans Saints. So that's, as long as that goes, like, as long as they continue to have to, ride the Derek Carr, Spencer Rattler, Jake Hayner, train. Like, I'm all in favor of that. So we'll see what happens with the Saints moving forward. But you guys, you can check out Locked On Saints and Ross Jackson and see what he's talking about with the coach and the quarterback there. But of course, we will keep you here locked on the Panthers and the Falcons as this week unfolds in this new calendar year of 2025, where there's, hope springs eternal and bright optimism for both of these football teams. And we'll see, which comes crashing, burning down on Sunday for either one of these teams. So make sure you continue to make Locked On Falcons and Locked On Panthers your first listen. And of course, for your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL show with 2 shows daily. Firstly, Madman Tyler Rowland giving you that double shot of NFL espresso first thing in the morning, and then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.